I have been writing fiction for 18 years, and in that time, as you can imagine, I have written a lot of chapters. I have learnt that chapters are not a finish line, they are a start line, a bridge to the very next chapter. And therefore its job is to make the reader not feel like they've had a satisfying ending, but to want to immediately turn the page and go to the very next chapter. So in this video, I'm going to talk about 4 very specific techniques that I use to create that bridge and make sure that the reader is hooked and captivated enough to finish one chapter and go immediately to the next. And it's not going to be generic end on a cliffhanger advice. These are very specific techniques that I have pulled together from my own writing and my own experience that I actually use in the books I write today. Technique number 1 is the decisive punchline. This technique, I like to use it most when I have a very complex chapter that is very information dense. When the character has been absorbing lots of information, a lot of things have been happening, there's a lot of inner thought. I like to end the chapter on a very short, decision-based ending coming from the character that has been dealing with a lot of complex information. I'll give you an example from the book I'm writing right now. So in this book, I have a character that has been promoted to a senior security position in the town that he lives in. It just so happens that his father is the leader of the town and he's very young and pretty inexperienced. There is a lot of doubt around the town and within the character himself about if he is the right person for the job or if the father just promoted him to that position just because he's his son. The whole chapter is based around that. He's meeting lots of people, he's having a lot of inner thought, a lot of doubt. He talks to his friends about it. And then later in the chapter, I have his very first big decision that he has to make. It's about if he should let someone enter the town or not. And the last sentence of that chapter is simply, "Open the gate," he said. Very short, but it's a decision-based ending that I think is extremely powerful. The reason being, when you have a whole chapter that is based around a question focused on a character. Now, in my example, it's about whether a character is worthy. It can be anything. Just think about it as whether a character is X or whether a character should do X. When you have a chapter based around that, I like to end it on their decision connected to that question. And I like it to be short and punchy, like a punchline. This is because when you end it like that, the reader feels like they need to know what happens after. I'm not ending where the decision is made and then the aftermath is explained. I end on the decision because after you put in the reader's head, this is the question, this is the question, this is the question, he made a decision, and then you end it right there, the reader will be thinking, whoa, what happens after? Was it the right decision? Is this going to be good or bad? And that will lead them to want to go to the next chapter to find out what is happening. It's curiosity based, it's based in uncertainty. I believe that a lot of what makes stories great is the uncertainty around aspects of it. It extends the tension that the reader feels connected to the question around the character. How do you do this in your own writing? When you have a chapter, as I've explained, that is focused on a big question connected to a character, end on the decision that acts as a mini climax to that question. It's not an answer. The answer would be the aftermath. You don't include that in the chapter because that would relieve the tension. You end the chapter when the tension is at its climax, when that decision is made. When you have a chapter that fits this description, check to see where you end it. Do you end it after the decision is made and then the aftermath happens and you explain a bit? I would suggest that you see how the chapter works if you take that out and put that in the next chapter. I think it's very effective. When I am reading and something ends like this, I'm sure you've had it where you're reading, maybe it's late at night, you want to go to bed and you're reading and something's building up, this question is building up, and then the chapter just ends on the decision. You're thinking, I need to know what happens here. It creates that curiosity that the reader just has to keep reading and relieve. Technique number 2 is the quiet revelation. So this is not to be overused. Use it sparingly, but when it is used, it can be extremely impactful. The quiet revelation is a simple sentence that on its own would not be that remarkable. However, given the context of the story, will have massive implications. So it's very linked to the type of story you're writing, and it depends on what you're building up and building to throughout the story. This sentence should only be powerful if it's connected to the context of the story. The impact is not in the words, it's in implications that it has for the world that you've built. An example that I use in a book I'm writing right now is, in the town, they are very low on food. They've been running out of food, they've had a bad harvest, and there's one chapter where I end it on a character realizing that food has gone missing, and they tell someone, they say, some food has gone missing. By itself, that might not be a very important thing. In a different situation where there's a city with an abundance of food and someone says food has gone missing, they'll be like, it's all right. How much? A little bit is fine. But within the context of the story, where I've built up that the townspeople are essentially starving, the fact that food has gone missing is massive for the story. And ending on that, again, like technique 1, creates massive tension and curiosity, where the reader really wants to find out how this will affect everyone in the story. I call it the quiet revelation because I deliver it as plainly as possible. I don't have characters react dramatically to it. I often just end right on the revelation, right on the information being delivered, just in very plain writing, as simply as possible. In my example, I just say some food has gone missing and I end the chapter there. Very simple, yet very powerful in the context of the story that I've written. So when you want to do this in your own writing, when you have some information that is uninteresting by itself, but within the context of the story and the world you've built has massive implications and will have massive consequences, put it at the end of the chapters, the last sentence, and deliver the information as simply as possible. No dramatic reactions, no complicated words, just deliver it and let it sit. Trust the reader that they know, based on the writing that you have done before, that this is a massive thing. You don't need to make it massive with the way you write it, because when they connect the dots in their mind, their imagination will make it into something huge, and that will make them want to keep reading. Technique number 3 is the emotional release. This works especially well when a character has been holding in or suppressing some negative emotions for a long time or throughout the whole story. It could be pain, fear, shame, something that a character has been feeling but holding in and suppressing for a sustained period of time. Then at the end of the chapter, the emotion is released, but it is released in a way that is the opposite to the emotion that they have been suppressing. This usually works when there has been some kind of resolution to this emotion. I'll give you an example. Imagine in the story a character has been suppressing shame because they want to be a musician, but their parents want them to be a doctor. And they've been wrestling with musician, what I want versus my parents want me to throughout the whole story. And eventually it gets to a point where the character decides, you know what, I'm going to follow my dreams, I'm going to be a musician. A good way to use this technique, in this example, the character jumping on the table in front of their parents and singing in joy after they've decided, you know what, I'm going to follow my dreams. That is a big dramatic emotional release, which is the opposite to the emotion that they have been suppressing after they finally resolved the tension that was within them. This has to be earned. So this can be especially useful in later chapters, that you've built up through the story that a character has truly been suppressing a negative emotion to the point where they're fit to burst. But the reason it's effective is you don't make them burst with the emotion that they have been suppressing. It happens at a pivot point, at a decision where they've made, and that relief, the release of tension from the decision they've made, explodes, but explodes in the opposite way. So instead of shame, it's joy. Instead of fear, it's bravery. That will bring the reader along with them and make them feel, oh wow, this is amazing, this is great. And then they'll want to continue reading to see how it evolves afterwards. Finally, this character has relieved this tension within them. Let's see what they do next. The way you do this in your book is you first have to build the character out properly. They have to have a clear goal, a clear obstacle, and they have to be clearly suppressing the emotion that obstacle is creating within them. When they finally overcome that obstacle, unleash it in a burst of positive emotion that is opposite to the negative emotions they have been suppressing. But then again, and you'll see a pattern here, don't explain the aftermath in that chapter. End on the explosion of positive emotion and then end it there, and let the reader have to turn the page and go to the next chapter to find out what happens after. In the musician example I used, I wouldn't explain how the parents react to this impromptu performance on the table. I would leave that till the next chapter. I would end on the action, on the emotional release. Technique number 4 is what I like to call the impact reversal. This is when you end a chapter with a piece of information that recontextualizes everything that came before it. The reason I call it the impact reversal is because I like to deliver it in as few words as possible to make the reader have to again connect the dots themselves. An example would be something like, in this particular chapter, a character accidentally kills someone. It seems like an accident, they're distressed, and you end the chapter on a piece of information, perhaps then thinking, oh no, I've done it again. I've done it again. That word then recontextualizes everything in the chapter where it seemed like it was a one-off accident, and immediately the reader is like, again? What? And they need to keep reading to find out what that means. That's an example that I use actually in the book I'm writing now. The faster and punchier the delivery, the more impactful it is, because it leaves the reader with incomplete information that their imagination will start to fill, and they need to keep reading to find out what on earth is going on. I like to do this where if I have some information that recontextualizes story points that came before, I'll end the chapter on it. However, I'll write it out fully, and then I'll compress it and compress it again and compress it again until I can get it into as few words as possible. If it's one word, that's great. In the example I used, that again is doing so much work, and making it that simple is what creates the gap and makes the reader want to continue to find out what is actually going on here. And there you have it. Those are 4 very specific techniques that you can use to end your chapter with a gut punch that makes the reader feel forced to continue reading to find out more. You'll notice that a lot of it is about not over-explaining, ending in an impactful way that creates a ton of curiosity in the reader so that they want to continue reading. I truly believe that the end of a chapter is not just to end that chapter, it's a precursor to the next one. They have to connect, it's a bridge. Let me know in the comments if you have any techniques that you use a lot to end chapters. I'm interested to know what you yourself have developed. With that being said, thanks for watching. AAWatson out.